Why was the 1976 Olympic Games considered one of the worst ever held? Most people have forgotten about these games, and for good reason. They were plagued by one controversy after another and ultimately proved to be a disaster for the host city of Montreal. In fact, the 1976 Olympics were such a monumental failure that they nearly put an end to the games altogether. And here's how. For starters, the games were mired in several political scandals. Quebec separatists used the games as a venue to push for independence, even going so far as to hijack the opening and closing ceremonies to illegally display the Quebec flag. And if that wasn't humiliating enough for the Canadian government, 29 nations outright boycotted the games due to South Africa's apartheid regime. But these PR disasters paled in comparison to the mind-boggling price tag that came with hosting the games. At the time, Montreal was still recovering from a wave of bombings and murders carried out by a Marxist-Leninist separatist group during the late 60s and early 70s. And in the aftermath of these attacks, hosting the Olympics was viewed as a way to stimulate the city's economy and draw foreign investors back to Quebec. Instead, the exact opposite happened. It was originally estimated that hosting the games would cost the city about 120 million Canadian dollars, with the Olympic Stadium itself costing just over 70 million. But with the government overseeing everything and paying out of pocket to construct both the stadium and the Olympic Village, costs began to spiral out of control as delays piled up thanks to an avalanche of red tape. Construction began a staggering 18 months behind schedule, putting the organizers at the mercy of Quebec's powerful labor unions, who in turn used the constant threat of strikes to overcharge the city millions of dollars in overtime fees. And to give you an idea of just how bad things got, in the 530 working days between December 1974 and April 1976, the unions went on strike for 155 of them. That's 30% of the time. From May 1975 until the end of October, less than a year before the opening ceremony was supposed to commence, the unions refused to do any work at all. Despite an original budget of $120 million, the final cost came in at $1.6 billion. More than 1,200% over budget, making it the highest cost overrun of any Olympic Games in history. In fact, the city of Montreal didn't finish paying off the debt it took on to host the games until December of 2006, more than 30 years after the controversial closing ceremony. So, how did it all go so horribly wrong? Well, much of the blame falls on the unions which held the games hostage, because in a desperate attempt to finally break the delays and finish the project, the Premier of Quebec had to literally bribe the head of Montreal's largest construction union, who also happened to have some ties with the mafia. But the thing is, the real problem with the 1976 Olympics lay with the government itself. Because without the backing of politicians who insisted on handling the entire project themselves, there never would have been an avenue for politically corrupt unions and well-connected mafia bosses to drive up costs like this in the first place. Now, obviously, no one in the Montreal City Council or Quebec government expected the games to cost more than 13 times their original budget. But the incentive structure they created made it inevitable that such a disaster could happen. Perhaps that's why Thomas Sowell warns us that there is never a more stupid or more dangerous way of making decisions than by putting those decisions in the hands of people who pay no price for being wrong.